Hey everyone, Tony here, and I have an exciting announcement before our episode begins. Some time ago, Victoria Rogers of the Broadswords podcast set about gathering other podcasters for a promotion of the upcoming book from Wizards of the Coast, Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes. We were lucky enough to be a part of this amazing opportunity and are going to be featured with 22 other awesome podcasts for this Podcast of Foes. We'll be running a one-shot in the world of Ostia, utilizing the material from Tome of Foes, and be featured on the Dungeon Delve podcast feed. Our own episode will be released May 14th, so please come check us out, and thank you so much, Victoria, for including us in this amazing opportunity. I really don't think I can convey how excited I am about this. Again, come check us out May 14th for Podcast of Foes. But for now, on to the show. Have you ever found yourself after a game of D&D debating over a particular rule that came up and trying to figure out, as a group, how to break it? As a DM, do you get that feeling of dread when your player asks, if you look at it this way? Well, we decided to turn that into a podcast. A group of DMs come together every episode as we discuss how, rules as written, we can figure out how to maximize what we can do with a rule and how we can use other rules to break the game. Each episode, we will be joined by a guest, including DMs from some of our favorite podcasts, and get a sneak peek behind the DM screen from some of our favorite shows as they share their own thoughts and experiences on a particular rule and how it has affected their games. Please feel free to jump in on our discussions by leaving us a comment on Podbean, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher, or feel free to email me at dm@dndraw.com, or send us a tweet to @rules as written, and let us know how the rule may have come up during one of your games, or how you figured out a way to break the game that we didn't discuss. So, thanks for joining us.
Hey everybody, I'm Rachel.
Hey, this is Bethany.
Hey, this is Tony.
Hi, this is Will. I'm with the Plane Shift Cast.
Today we will be discussing surprise and vision.
So, Will, why don't you tell us a little bit more about your Plane Shift podcast, or whatever you call it?
The podcast is just called Plane Shift. It's a live play 5th edition D&D podcast where we play as planeswalkers, the major storyline kind of character archetypes for Magic the Gathering. Me and my friends really loved playing Magic. I had developed some Planeswalker NPC statistics for a campaign hook that ended up not really going anywhere, but in the process, I ended up making a source book for playing as a Planeswalker in D&D to go with the Plane Shift PDFs that Wizards of the Coast had been releasing. And I had been talking to some friends, and we'd always been kicking around the idea of making a podcast, so we ended up making that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Now, does it come out like weekly, bi-weekly, or how often do you guys
release weekly?
Weekly. Okay.
Now, after episode 11, we've shifted to bi-weekly because there are other things I have plans that I want to produce, and I need the time to actually do that.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, let's go ahead and get started on the topic of surprise.
I'll admit, for a very brief second, I thought you were going to surprise me with another topic.
Oh,
Let's get to our topics. Is the surprise?
Yeah, I switch over like, ta-da, it's flanking, and you're like, oh.
You're like, oh, I read the wrong notes.
I've been preparing for some time for the wrong thing. It's like
Welcome
a pop
to
quiz.
D&D, where your players and listeners go rogue.
Pretty much.
Especially if they are rogues.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're the worst.
Rogues are the worst, or players are the worst?
Both kids. No. Yeah. So surprise and alertness is what we have on topic, and there's lots of different, I guess, like feats and stuff that we have. I'm scrolling down to look at.
I think maybe we could start with sort of setting the scene for when does this come up in the game?
Yeah, I'm like,
And
how do we do this usually?
And usually it comes up when something is unconventional. Like if it's something pretty predictable, like the adventurers are walking down a road to a new city and they've heard that there's going to be bandits along the way. And they're like, okay, we're keeping our eye out. We're looking for the bandits. They're rolling perception checks. they spot the bandits, but the bandits attack them anyway, and then they murder all the bandits. Like, that's when things just go really predictably.
Yep.
But that almost never happens. It's all of these other shades of different scenarios where the party sometimes are the surprisers.
Yes, sometimes the party can get the jump on an enemy.
Yeah, but there's just a lot of things that I think are a little squirrely about how does it work once the surprise has happened, where someone's jumped out of the bushes and waved a crossbow at somebody else or whatever it is.
Booga booga.
Yeah, and how you deal with that, because I don't think I've ever played with a group where we aren't always mentioning, by the way, as we're traveling or as we're skulking through this dungeon, I would like to be paying attention.
Right.
Yeah.
That's why I like 5th edition introduced passive checks. Because the instant you tell anyone to roll dice, regardless of what the result is, they know something was supposed to happen.
Right. Even if your players are really good about not metagaming, it's really hard not to be anticipating something I'm not prepared for is about to occur. I totally agree.
Like, if you say, we'll make a perception check, and they roll a 1, then it's really easy for a player, even not consciously, to go like, all right, well, I ready my weapons.
Right.
Yep.
And even if they don't, they're already thinking in their mind, even if my character isn't going to react to this, but as a player, I'm already anticipating something's about to happen. It's a trap, it's something. Yeah. Something's going to attack me, or
the DM doesn't have us roll dice for no reason.
Right. Yeah, I do like passive perception.
Because I think that's the only way to sort of diffuse that instinct in your players, is to just randomly make them roll and then go, okay. Even no matter what they roll, just say, okay, cool.
Yep. I actually do that with the kids. They like rolling dice, and so I have them roll it. And when I actually DM'd with Phil was in the game, I was like, all right, everybody give me a perception check. And he'd already played Curse of Strahd, so he already knew what to anticipate. And he gave me a weird look. I'm like, roll a perception check. And he was like, okay. And so he rolled, and everybody told me their scores, and I just pretended like I was writing them down. I basically picked up my pen, because I had the DM screen, and wrote it down, and all the kids are like, what's going to happen? I'm like, all right, you guys you see the hallway in front of you. I explained the scene. And I'm like, what would you all like to do? And they were all on edge. And even Phil was like, what is happening?
When it comes to perception checks, I only ask them to roll if they're pretty much saying, I am doing a thing that would be perceiving, or how do I look for something? Otherwise, I just use the passive perception because it's easier.
Yeah. And I'll do the same thing. Like, anytime they ask, even if there's actually nothing around, guys, nothing at all. But it's like, yeah, go ahead, roll a perception check.
Because you're paranoid.
Yeah.
One thing that I had to kind of figure out how to deal with was I had a player with the alert feat.
Yes.
And they had already rolled very high on their wisdom score because they were playing a paladin. No, this was a different character. They were playing a cleric, same thing, but so they had a very high wisdom score, and they had the alert feat, which gave them a passive perception of 19.
Yep.
So I was like, well, then nothing can hide from you. You observe everything. So what I did instead was I started to consider, how would alertness work? So I thought of here's how our brains work. When something moves, we notice it. So I started thinking okay, if you're actively looking, you won't notice with your alert feat if someone is hiding behind a tapestry, so long as they stay very still.
Mm-hmm.
If you search the room and you roll for it, you might find someone hiding behind the tapestry. Otherwise, you have to have some surprises to keep the story interesting.
Yeah, I would say having the alert feat and a really high passive perception doesn't make you like a Jedi. You're just very attuned to what's going on around you more than the average person, and you might feel like something's off, but it's more, I would say, unconscious than.
I think, to me, the way I've interpreted the alert feat, because it says you can't be surprised while you are conscious. While your perception can be really high, people can still sneak up on you. People can still get close to you. But what I see it a little bit more as your ability to react, how quickly you can react. So if someone does sneak all the way up to the group and then goes for the stab, you can still react during that time just because you're so alert that your blades are being drawn before you have fully realized that the danger's there. That's kind of how I see.
Almost more like it's an intuition.
Yeah. Where, yeah, if someone's hiding behind a tapestry, yeah, there might not be noticed right away. But if they then come around and sneak out because you have the alert feed that you're so focused and looking out for danger that you just react instinctively so quickly.
So the way you use alert or very high passive perception is essentially it helps negate sneak attacks or surprise rounds.
Surprise rounds.
Surprise rounds.
In a sense, yeah. Because what was the passive perception for my character in your game?
So Bethany's character in the end had a 23 passive perception.
Oh my god.
Double proficiency in perception.
And high wisdom.
And a high wisdom, whole thing.
And we got to level 15. So.
Yeah, so eventually she had a 23 passive perception. So almost nothing could sneak up on her. But what I wound up doing also is there's certain points, because I ran out of the abyss, there's certain points in the book that they mention if someone rolls a perception check, then they can discover like this small opening in a side passage.
Right.
And I was looking, I was like, yeah, if they roll a, DC 15, but like, yeah, but she has a passive perception of a 23. Like she might suddenly notice like there's a slight draft off to your side.
That's one thing that that kind of gets into what I was saying with passive perception is like some things you can only find by looking for them. Like, hey, there's a secret, the bookshelf has a secret passageway behind it. You, with your passive perception, might be able to notice that there's a draft behind the bookshelf, but not necessarily notice, but you wouldn't be able to see like, oh, this one, or notice, hey, this one book is a slightly different color than the rest of them, but wouldn't know you wouldn't have both of those with just your passive perception.
I'd agree with that.
Yeah, you're not psychic.
That's another thing is like, because this is an auditory, because D&D is largely auditory, and because it depends so much on the theater of the mind, as soon as the DM mentions something, the players know it's important.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing as, okay, roll. It's, okay, you notice there's a bookshelf in the room. They're going to want to check out that bookshelf. And you either have to introduce a lot of red herrings, or you have to spend a lot more time setting the scene when you're describing something. But then you risk they need to go through the bookshelf to continue. If I describe the whole room, they might forget that the bookshelf exists, and then I've got to.
Yeah.
Which is more of a problem when you're doing modules, because you can always just be like, oh, the secret passage is somewhere else.
Right. Yeah, it gives you a lot more freedom. That's true. Yeah. And I would say overall, I've been running Prince of the Apocalypse-ish for a few years now, which I mean, it started as that, now it's its own thing. But largely,
that's the best way to do modules.
Yeah, but largely, I think I've given myself some wiggle room to allow things to turn out a little bit different and not always follow just what the book has, because that I think it can be really limiting. But I do agree with what you're saying about, I mean, you want to be able to let them explore and not just be like, and here's a thing, and here's a thing, and just present each useful bit of information to them at a time, so that it doesn't feel like it's earned if you just have a really high pass perception or you roll really high up perception. Because I would say some things can't be determined with just perception, though. That's where
where the idea of perception versus investigate tends to come up. But
one thing I don't have exactly on here is surprise rounds, because that kind of plays into the piece on the alert feat.
Yes, actually, that kind of jumps us back into surprise, which I had heard the other day. Actually, it's an interesting stipulation. There technically is no such thing as a surprise round in 5e. It's just the first round of combat, and anybody who is surprised has what's considered the surprised condition, which actually says here, if you're surprised, you can't move or take an action on your first turn of the combat, and you can't take a reaction until that turn ends.
Which is functionally identical.
Right.
It's essentially the same thing.
Semantically different.
Yeah.
Semantic.
But it does, I feel like it does give them a bit more rule leeway for like classes like Barbarian are supposed to be able to act very quickly. So it might be like to give them the ability to ignore surprise for a sec.
Right. So the way functionally we typically do it is to say, okay, if there's a surprise element, there's a surprise round. If you are not surprised, you're acting. If you are surprised, you're not acting, basically. But we still have the initiative all in there, so everyone knows where they fall. And that helps allow for the different classes that prevent you from being surprised. at the beginning of combat.
That was actually a big thing for your ranger, because in favored terrain, rangers are always alert to danger.
Mm-hmm.
So we wind up treating it in a lot of ways, especially with a 23 passive perception.
Yeah.
Chances are not being surprised. And you were talking about barbarian earlier too. We still roll all the initiative for the round, even if there is a surprise round, because barbarians at level 7 get that ability Feral Instinct, that on their turn, as long as they use their bonus action to go into a rage first, they can act normally.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're so honed for
Yeah,
being ready to rage at all times.
They're just ready to rage.
So I think that's how we've handled it, but I've definitely heard other arguments for different ways to handle like how to surprise work in combat. Because it is a little odd and it depends on the situation. And then there's the idea of, well, if you're surprised, there has to be some sort of a trigger, right? Like something happened. Somebody jumped out and yelled at you, somebody shot you with a crossbow, like something occurred that triggered it all. And I don't think the rules have a clear way to deal with the trigger.
I'm looking back at surprise, but I don't think so.
I don't think there is.
I think it's just up to the DM to decide
what the trigger is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
At what point have you started that surprise round?
Right.
And do you have external factors that would help with that? Like, say, just a role-playing scenario that might come up. Your players are at a ball and the food is drugged.
That's never come up.
Would an alert feature help you notice those specific things? Would they be able to, like, would your ranger or your barbarian be able to, with a high passive perception, notice that the food tastes different? Because perception isn't just sight.
Yeah,
that's a good point, but I don't think that taste or necessarily poison would be something that you could discern with a perception check or even passive, because it's more about your surroundings, though it does take into account the keenness of your senses. I'm looking at a perception check.
I believe
there isn't really a role for how does this taste outside of perception.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like that's maybe more of almost like a survival thing. I know they're both wisdom based. Tony's flipping through the book right now to look up survival. I can tell what he's doing. But that is an interesting scenario, because that is something that would surprise you that you would not anticipate. But the idea of how would you know it's happening as it's happening? For my players, it would be when the DM says make a con save. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing, too, is you could twist it that if your players have been invited to a ball in a land that they're not familiar with, they're eating food that they're probably not familiar with.
Right.
So they wouldn't have that feat. Yeah.
Then it would be, you'd bring up advantage and disadvantage.
No, because they wouldn't have any advantage because they're not familiar with the food.
Well, no, like, I mean, like, if you're using perception or survival to detect whether or not the food is poisoned.
Oh, yeah.
Well, you're not familiar with this food or these exotic spices, so roll with disadvantage.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. Now I feel like everyone in my game is going to be concerned about poison after this conversation.
We've been poisoned before.
They
are already.
It was only the one time, and it did not go well for the poisoners. So
I was fine.
No, the poisoners.
Oh, okay.
You guys were fine. Yeah, the party was fine. It was the people who tried to poison them. It did not go well because they were very angry about being poisoned.
Yes, we're not fond of that.
Poisoner's kit.
Oh, Tony's looking for poisoner's kit. That's probably the only thing that would actually give you advantage on detecting poison, right?
Possibly.
Or any sort of bonus.
Maybe I could swing like, hey, here's if your background allows it. Like, oh no, my character was a chef.
Well, I guess maybe
You'd
part
know
of it
what
is
food's supposed to taste like.
And maybe part of it is it would prevent you from being poisoned. It would just help you determine what the poison was, because that would be like change the DC for the check. It's probably
would
what
that be a medicine check?
Especially because you've already eaten it or drank it.
Yeah. It's too late for you. You just need to determine what it is, and maybe if you happen to know what the antidote is.
I mean, essentially, medicine is to help you treat the poison, and if you are like proficient with a poisoner's kit, it actually in the Xanthar's Guide does say your knowledge allows you some insight in how to treat this particular type of poison.
So I guess this takes it all back to surprise, because I think what you mentioned, Will, that was really good is that perception is not just a visual ability. And I think sometimes we think of it as so visual. I'm looking for things, but it's more than that.
I think that largely comes from, and honestly, I think this is one of the biggest frustrations I have with tabletop gaming in general, is it's very deeply still tied to its roots as a war game.
Yep.
So when we think of perception, when we think of any checks, we think of them in relation to combat.
Yeah. For the most part, I would say, yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That's because that's what we've been talking about is surprise combat for the most part.
And when you're fighting someone, there isn't really, if you take the time to smell them, you're going to throw off the pace. You're going to, at the very least, have some questions to answer about, hey, first, why are you taking the time to sniff your opponent? And second, why do they smell like strawberries?
Yeah. There's other times, though, that smell could come up. Like if, for instance, there's some sort of gas in the room or something like that. Someone with a high passive perception or someone who's rolling perception would probably pick up on that first if it's something very subtle, because they would detect something's not right about the air.
That the air seems different.
Yeah. And overall, I'm really happy perception is one check, because we started playing in 3.5 and Rachel was our DM and she let us build whatever we wanted, so we're entirely responsible for the horrible characters we built. And I didn't have proficiency in any of the useful checks like spot or listen, or I couldn't detect anything. I put all my points into like alchemy. So
it was my job to spot and listen.
Yeah, I do like perception is all combined into one check. It makes it a lot easier as a DM too. And it gives you more freedom to describe what it is the characters pick up on, instead of it just being like a radar, which I think early on is what people kind of wanted it to be. Like, okay, I'm perceiving. What do I see? What do I ping out there?
And I think you mentioned gas. I think that's an interesting opportunity for rolling perception with a different ability score. Because say, hey, the gas has pushed most of the breathable air out of this tight room. Roll perception with Constitution to notice that your breath is a little short.
I like that, actually.
Yeah, I think there's some rules in the book for like swapping ability scores
for
checks.
I know the one they give an example of is using strength to intimidate instead of charisma by actually performing a feat of strength. But yeah,
yes,
basically.
But yeah, I definitely can see a way of doing that, especially if you're trying to give some more freedom to your characters who aren't proficient in those like top 3 most useful skills, but have other things like maybe your hardy fighters or barbarians. Tony's nodding because
paladins with con.
Because I am a hardy fighter / barbarian.
Yeah, that's a good point to give more of an opportunity. But I think as a DM, that I would sort of handle that as what is the character or the player describing that they're trying to do. Because sometimes they literally say, "I'm looking for this. I just want to look. I'm just using my eyeballs to stare."
Well, yeah, I'm thinking of it because like now I'm thinking like how would that roll to tell that your breathing is short, because one thing that people wouldn't be able to perceive normally is gasoline, because its gas is doesn't have any color. It is completely odorless, and literally the only way you know it is either when it pushes all the breathable air out or when it explodes.
I mean, it's possible to say sometimes they just don't know.
Yeah.
Sometimes I would say as a DM, there are surprises that they're going to be a surprise.
There's like, not a way you can figure it out.
Yeah, you can't anticipate it, or you can't anticipate it long enough in advance to prevent it. I would say that sometimes that just happens within the narrative.
Or you could anticipate something different.
Or incorrect.
Like you could just be straight up wrong. Like, okay, we're in this old drow tunnel. I'm going to keep my eyes open for drow traps, and it turns out that gnomes took over the place a couple years ago and moved all the traps 3 feet down.
Oh,
we actually had something similar happen where we were confident that this crack in a wall up on a ledge was a trap.
Oh my gosh, this just happened.
We were so confident about this because the way everything was set up, it felt like the walls around us were extremely smooth and we were in a like lava filled kind of area. So we're like, oh gosh, there's a way that this crack can open and allow lava to pass through because there's people guarding this spot. Turns out it's nothing.
It was nothing. I don't know what I did as DM to lead them to believe it was something, but they became obsessed with it because they had detected it. It was everything.
That's like what we mentioned before. If you present anything you tell a player pretty much has to be relevant. We were trained to think that way because if you tell us about the more red herrings you tell us about, the less likely you are to notice that thing that's important.
Yeah, I mean, it had some relevance. It just wasn't important, and it wasn't important the way they thought it was because they jumped to their own conclusions about it. And that's the nature of the game. Yes, sometimes not everything is a puzzle to be solved. It's just a part of the world. It's just a thing that's happening. It's not the answer, but they're like, oh, this is the answer. This is it. Lava's gonna come through here. It's gonna torch us all. Let's all fight these monsters to avoid this lava that's going to inevitably flow through this crack. And I'm like, I have no idea what they're talking about.
Right.
Like, this is nothing.
We have to take out the guards quickly.
Yes.
Yep.
And, it worked out okay.
Yeah, we took them out quickly.
One of the questions I had is, we've talked about actively perceiving. I have had players, and I know I've been a player who says I want to be actively perceiving at all times, which is kind of like I'm always trying to be alert and attuned for danger, but in a sense you can't always be paying 100% attention to the world around you because you're doing something else.
Yep.
Otherwise you're just no fun at a party.
Well, I guess if you're just staring at everybody and everything and like smelling them the whole time.
At all times.
Then it becomes a character flaw. Like, I'm deeply paranoid and I always assume there are traps everywhere. And then it's like, well, is your character gonna lean into that? Or are you just like, do you just not want to be caught flat-footed?
Right, that's true. And I think it's also sometimes a trade-off. Like, if you want to be, yes, please feel free to let me know that you're paying attention to what's going on and you can make perception checks, but you can't be doing that and something else that requires a large amount of your attention because you just can't do both well. I know you're an adventurer and you could roll well, but that just doesn't make sense. You can't give 100% attention to two things.
Correct.
You also have to think of what are you trying to perceive? Because if a player just tells me, I'm rolling perception,
yes.
I will go, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Nice.
What are you looking for? Oh, I'm just rolling perception. Oh, well, then you can roll whatever you want. I'm not going to respect the result.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely have had to get down to the nitty gritty on what are you looking for? And usually Tony says something along the lines of,
well, I'm a fighter,
danger.
so I am looking for signs of danger, particularly people that seem like they're trying to sneak up and attack us.
See, that's something.
Yeah.
Like, I'm looking for someone that looks kind of shady.
Right.
And then I would even go like, you know what? That's roll perception, and then if you roll well enough, roll insight.
I mean, if you're in a crowd or something like
yeah.
that, if you're trying, he'll do that where you're like, I want to look to see if anyone's following us through this crowd.
And sure enough, like, he'll look around, it's like, it seems like a couple people, it's like, see if they actually seem intent on you. Okay,
Right.
insight. Yeah, I'd agree with that 100%.
Well, sometimes you rolled insight, then you go, oh, no, they're just looking at us because we're a weird-looking party of adventurers, not
Yeah.
because they have anything against us.
Because I'm standing 2 feet above everybody else.
Because you're Goliath. So, Will, I think you added the one about advantage and if it's too binary.
Yeah, I like the concept of advantage. I like being able to go like, you know what, this situation is working in your favor, or you're taking 15, or you've explained what you're doing very well. Roll with advantage. But there's no nuance to it. It's not like, okay, you're doing, this is good, but it's not great. Roll like, because 5th edition did a lot to remove, like, okay, you add +2,
Right.
and they shifted all of that into advantage or disadvantage.
Yep.
So it's like, okay, roll a perception check with advantage or nothing else.
So I could say what I do is I do a lot of artistic interpretations of DCs. So I do a lot of DC sliding based on that, rather than giving the players advantage. If they have done an excellent job explaining how or why they're doing something, I lower the DC. Or if they've explained why their character, hey, just as a reminder, as my background, Tony might say, I'm a smith, so I should be able to like look at these smith's tools and discern if they've been used recently or something. So I would then lower the DC.
So they would have a look. Okay.
That's how I do it.
Yeah. And that works too, but then you get back into like the concepts of, hey, D&D was built basically around a combat system, and then the role playing was added afterwards.
True.
I just feel like advantage and disadvantage are this really, okay, you either have it or you don't, and you're just going to constantly be arguing for whether or not you should have advantage or whether or not you shouldn't have disadvantage.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. Basically, the way I handle that is I don't give people advantage or disadvantage unless the book tells me I have to. So they don't get to lobby for it.
The only time that we actually use advantage, like just us is when we have inspiration. That's it.
So you like the idea of having more bonuses and detriments based on what specifically the player's doing?
Yeah, I like being able to kind of give that extra input and give an award without it just being like, because you can also only do that. You can also only give advantage or disadvantage once.
True. Yeah. There's no uber advantage, as we've been over several times with one of our players who's like, so if I have advantage and then I get advantage again, like, no, there's just advantage. You're not going to roll 3 dice and take the highest. I'm so sorry. I know that's what you want.
And then it's like, well, this is bad, but it's not terrible. Disadvantage doesn't quite cover it, but there's no other way. Like, I'm not going to give you a minus. The only way I've thought of trying to like find a middle ground between those two, like, I like advantage and I like boosts and setbacks, is like, okay, after you do this, here's a D4. Whatever you get, subtract it or add it to your results.
So that's kind of like the spell
Bless. Or Bane.
Yeah. It's basically like using that. Yeah, I guess I could see a purpose for that. Personally, I'm pretty straightforward in how I do things. I'll adjust the DC, and I think they don't have to know what it is. That way, it's more exciting. I mean, I know you guys would love to roll more dice for sure at all times.
Yeah.
But I try to keep it simple.
Yeah, with the kids, I try to keep it super straightforward because they're very simple people. So I usually
the more math you make them do, the less they're going to enjoy it.
Yeah. Well, I don't even do like the sliding DCs. I'll have a set DC. I usually don't set it super high. They're all level 1 still. So I'll just say, all right, because you explained very well what you're doing, go ahead and roll with advantage. Or because he is assisting you in XYZ, roll with advantage. Or, however I want to phrase it so that they know that, like, I try to phrase it so that they know that they're being praised, so to speak, for doing well in the game, because I'm still teaching them all the rules and I'm still teaching them how it actually works and trying to encourage them to, not be just like, I'm going to do a thing, but a lot of them are very good at describing, I want to like use my rope and use, it says I have a crowbar and I want to like tie the rope to the crowbar and then like use it as a hook to like climb up on the roof. I'm like, oh,
sure.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. Why not?
On your acrobatics then. And they're like, yes,
And that's also why like advantage works there, because if their crazy idea works out, you want that to be a bit more likely because it would be an awesome storytelling moment.
Yeah.
I'm still open to awesome failures, but that's me. I mean, you never know. Things can still happen. What we haven't really talked about is vision, and we've said, okay, you're perceiving, often that means you're looking at things. Like, how well can you see? I think is one of those. It's one of those things. Yeah. A lot of us just treat our player characters as DMs as like they're short-sighted because it's easier that way, or there's just so many things obstructing your view. You only see the things that are right around you because that's what I have in front of me as DM right now. Maybe it's a bit of DM laziness. I mean,
the only things that actually specifically talk about vision is when they talk about dim light or darkness.
Yep.
Yeah, because the rules actually in the book on vision are not very specific. They just talk about like what can hinder your vision, like darkness or other things like, I guess, like fog or foliage. But it doesn't tell you anything about how far you can see.
Yeah.
Or how well.
Well, and that again goes into like its history of wargaming, where you have a very clear map and very clear distances on that map because you're trying to represent actual location as closely as possible with your figurines. So 60 feet, you can take a ruler and go, okay, 60 feet.
Right. And
like, no, you do not perceive this. And that works a lot. That works really well with on the table or sites like Roll20. But if it's pure theater of the mind games, then 60 feet is completely arbitrary.
Yep.
Right. And the rules actually only break light into like bright light, dim light, and darkness. And those are the 3 types of light you get, basically. And it really just gives you a vague description of it lets you see normally, or it's slightly obscured, or it's heavily obscured.
Well, the big question for bright light is, what is normally?
We assume it's what it looks like outside in July in Florida. Like, it's like walking out in the sun. That's my understanding of bright light, but apparently that's not for everyone.
Well, that gets to one of the things I mentioned. The difference between dark and pitch black.
Yeah.
When I was with the Boy Scouts, we went through an abandoned mine shaft. It had been cleared out, it had been reinforced to be safe, but it was still an old shaft. And one of the things they do is you get all the way to the end, and then they say, okay, everybody, turn off your lights.
Yep.
Nope. And it is stunning, the difference between, because like you can go out at night and it will be very, very dark and you can't really see, but you can still kind of see.
Yeah, we have a lot of light pollution.
Even with your eyes closed, you can still kind of make out differences in light sources, even when it's dark out. When you're when you're deep underground with no lights, there is nothing.
It's smothering.
Yes, I hate total darkness.
It's awful. It's radically different, and there's not really any way to translate that for players, especially when you bring in dark vision of like, I'm completely okay with a drow being able to see very clearly at night, but if it's pitch black, so either dark vision isn't there's two ways to interpret dark vision. It's either your eyes are significantly better at picking up light in low light situations, like a cat, or you have magical eyesight.
Well, yeah, it's in the books actually, like the Forgotten Realms books. It's infravision for
drow.
Drow. But that would be really, really complicated for the game. So they're just like, drow have dark vision. You know, they just see it. I'm sorry, superior dark vision. Because you can't just have any dark vision if you're a drow. It has to be inherently superior. But yeah, that's a good point, because it really just simplifies light into those three categories, and darkness. Yeah, I mean, we're in Orlando. It's never, you could walk outside in the middle of the night and still see largely where you're going.
Well, darkness, the way it's described in 5e, actually takes that whole range of darkness from total darkness to like, a little bit of light from like some stars in the sky for some reason. It's just darkness is all of that.
But if you're in a deep dungeon or you're in the Underdark, like sometimes, unless there's some magical luminous fungi, it's literally nothing. And yeah, so your point is, makes sense, drow should be able to see in it, but you questioned maybe the other races.
If like a wood elf should be able to do that, because the way I kind of interpret wood elves is that their eyes are like cat's eyes, and just a lot more effective at seeing in broader ranges of light.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think it says for dark vision, it says that they could see in darkness as if it were dim light. So they still aren't like seeing as if it were broad daylight. It is still obscured, but it definitely, from a physical world mechanics perspective, doesn't quite make sense.
Yeah.
No.
Not at all.
Because it's magic.
Because magic eyes.
But it does say they only see shades of gray, because there's definitely no way they discern color.
Yeah.
I mean, there's certain places in the Underdark where it's just going to be dark all the time. And if a character doesn't have dark vision, it doesn't really matter. Not that their perception doesn't matter, but they're going to be at a disadvantage to spotting danger.
Yes.
So in my game, Tony's character is one of the only ones I think without,
I have no dark
vision. He's a Goliath. So he has a drift globe that he's been using whenever they go into dungeons, which are usually terribly lit, despite what video game RPGs would tell you about them all having torches.
Yes.
But having a magical floating light ball is really nice.
But it's also not super nice, because you basically are carrying a beacon with you at all times.
Yeah. I am a Goliath barbarian who just wants to kill things that are evil.
I mean, that's true.
That's a bit into like, well, your players aren't the only ones with perception checks.
Right, exactly. And the fact that you have like a light that's like, oh, like floating with you at all times. Like
the tasty meal is right here. Come get it.
And then it's like, if a dungeon is built by, or if it's a residence, or it's occupied by things that have dark vision, a sudden natural source of light will stand out like a literal beacon.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think that's kind of the other side where I know we definitely tend to focus more on like how do the players see the enemies, but there's also the flip side where the enemies are seeing the players. And one of the things that comes up, we talked about darkness earlier, the darkness spell in Tony's game where we were in the Underdark
The whole time.
Well, yeah, it was always dark. But even when it wasn't dark and we'd taken precautions to have light for our like party members who didn't have dark vision, we were constantly having enemies like throw darkness spells at us because they were drow, and that's, you know, why not? If you got it, you
they're
might
fine.
as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's totally cool.
One quick darkness spell, and then the other drow shoot you with poison crossbow
Well, the
bolts.
downside is though, even if you cast a darkness spell, even if you have dark vision, you still can't see through it.
Mhm.
Like, so it's not even. It's like a weird, just like opaque block of space.
It's just an orb of darkness.
So I think it's definitely an interesting mechanic that I think I've enjoyed using against enemies more than having used against me, because it's really unfortunate when you have a plan that relies on like sight for your spell casting and you're suddenly like surrounded by darkness. So one of the only times I think that this darkness spell has a really good combination with a class especially is when Tony found with warlocks.
So, because warlocks have the Devil's Sight invocation that allows them to see in both magical and non-magical darkness.
Which is pretty cool, because that means they could go cast a darkness spell and then they just casually like walk through it like it's nothing and can see exactly what they want to see, and everyone would assume, oh, it's darkness. The enemies would assume, I can't see, but also everyone else can't see as well. So it's kind of diabolical. Tony was really into it for a character he was building one time. Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's also for the sorcerer. That's the shadow magic.
Yeah, so sorcerers have an ability that, or the shadow magic sorcerers have an ability that if they use spell points to cast the spell darkness, they can still see through that darkness.
So it lets them kind of like snipe people who are, you know, mostly flailing about trying to figure out where the enemies are.
Yeah, and this is where surprise could come in, like people having a nice, simple conversation, and then a globe of darkness surrounds them.
I was surprised that Way of Shadow monks didn't have a similar ability.
Yeah, it's more for them about blending into the darkness rather than actually being able to create a form of darkness.
To take advantage of it.
Well, because they can innately cast the darkness spell.
Yes, but they can't see through it, I don't think.
So it like the way I've had it is they've either like they use their other senses and I've just had them roll with disadvantage to do anything.
Yeah, same here.
Or I've had the idea of them casting darkness and then shadow stepping using it to shadow step in what would ordinarily be bright light.
So we've talked a lot about darkness. The one we haven't really talked about is when things are more like obscured but not dark, like with
Walls?
Oh.
Walls?
No, but there's
More natural phenomena like heavy rain.
Or non-natural phenomena. Do you remember the ever-smoking bottle, Tony?
Oh.
Rachel remembers it.
Yeah, I remember that.
Man,
well, okay, so we entered a very small room, and we're suddenly being attacked by something that was invisible. We couldn't see it at all. We were just suddenly being attacked. And I initially was like, okay, I have this ever-smoking bottle. We can't see it, but maybe we can see it as it moves through the gas. So I released it. But of course, now none of us can see it. We already couldn't see the creature, but now it would have trouble seeing us. Was my whole intention on that. And we just barely can see like shifts in the smoke because it still has a physical form.
Because it was
an invisible stalker.
Invisible stalker, yeah, who was quietly stalking them. But the rest of the party was not thrilled. Yes, invisibly, as it should. But the rest of the party was not happy about suddenly being unable to like find the stairs and know what happened on the other side of the room. But it all worked out. Yeah,
it did.
There was a lot of attacks at disadvantage in that whole session. It was very entertaining for the DM.
Yes. Well,
and then you have if you have like an ever smoking bottle or a fog cloud spell. If you as a player put a fog cloud around a group of enemies and then just cause a little bit of chaos, then you get the Greek myth of the dragon's teeth of just like, well, then you can just step back and let them fight amongst each other, trying to fight who they're actually trying to get.
Whatever they think is happening.
As that drow character who was a ranger, I might have fog clouded a few times. Maybe some allies got caught up in a few times. And they weren't thrilled. What?
No, I was reminding that there was one point where the party was finally put into an ambush situation by a bunch of drow and a drow priestess. And your first move, Bethany, was like, okay, let's cause some confusion. Fog cloud on my feet now.
And then I just like run for it because I had boots of speed. So I'm like standing outside going, I hope everything's okay in there. I have my bow ready.
Start picking off the smaller
as they
drow.
flee the fog cloud. Yeah, it can be really nice when you can take advantage of, well, I guess vision being in your favor, especially if you have superior dark vision. But we haven't really talked about blind sight. The only thing we might want to talk about a little bit, because true sight specifically says that allows you to see in magical, normal, or magical darkness. So that's one of the other ways you can. Yeah,
true sight is ridiculous in what it can allow you to do, because it also see invisible creatures or objects. You automatically detect visual illusions.
I treat it like the lens of truth in Zelda games.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. The one thing that I think would be kind of creepy with true sight is you can see into the ethereal plane.
So all of a sudden you're like, ah, what are you doing here? And it's someone who's just been like,
Dave, didn't you die?
And he's like, yeah, just hanging. No big deal.
Yeah. I mean, the afterlife is super boring. I'm just following you guys around.
Yeah, get to see the adventures happen. So,
of course, to everyone else, you sound like a crazy person, but...
well, yeah, that's true. As you're talking at, like, the empty space next to you.
Yep.
Yeah, I think we only had blindsight on here because it basically means all of those other things about darkness and obscurity, like none of it matters.
Nope, it relies on your other senses.
Yeah, well, it's like echolocation, right?
Yeah, or like some magical perception. Either way, you aren't using your eyes to perceive the world around you.
Yep.
Yeah, so that darkness spell, not gonna matter at all.
And then, but that's like if you have a player with blind sight, then you have a challenge as a DM of, okay, I can't describe what the room looks like.
Yeah.
It feels like it's round.
You can give them like dimensions, but you can't really give like detailed, you notice there's an armoire in the corner and a bed. It's like, you notice there are several large objects in the room.
You sense their presence like a
Which
bat.
that comes up in ours because of my legendary weapon gives me
tremor sense,
which almost never works because I have garbage perception rolls. But
like ones and twos.
Yeah,
it's pretty tragic.
I just roll garbage on everything.
It's true. I'm sorry. But especially perception checks.
I perceive.
She's like, I would like to use my legendary weapon to sense what's going on around me. Oh.
Roll to 1 again, huh?
Yes. I'm just hanging out here.
So we've talked about like vision and darkness. The one thing that we haven't talked about that I think we really should is like stealth and hiding, because that's really where those ambushes, they're like your classic ambush with enemies and allies, is going to come into play.
Hiding is so poorly defined in 5e.
Yeah.
Yeah, overall, I think like what you pointed out, we don't actually have a lot of hiding where you're just doing a static I am hiding thing. It's more of a I am skulking around. Let me stealth in my heavy armor, that sort of thing. And that tends to be more where it comes up. But I think that's one of those times where often in parties people decide to sort of divide and conquer, if possible, to sort of play into the strengths of the various party members. Because if you don't have stealth at all, and you're wearing heavy armor, yeah, your odds of making like a reasonable stealth check are not great, especially when as a player you know what kind of the average passive perception is, and you know that likely you're gonna have not higher than that.
Nope.
So I think there's a certain amount of like the metagaming that sometimes goes into that. Like, but even within players, you would know, well, our sneaky rogue is going to be much better at stealthing down that tunnel to see what's at the other end than all of us tromping down together, ka-chunk, 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 to try to sneak up on whatever's down there at the end.
Yeah. Sneaking is the worst.
I love sneaking, but I play
so bad at it.
I play sneaky characters. If you played a sneaky character, then you'd love sneaking.
Yep.
That's pretty much how it works. If you're good at it, it's great. If you're not, then you're like, forget it. We'll just stomp down and smash whatever's at the other end, or talk to it, one or the other.
But then it's again like if you're staying perfectly still, you're going to be a lot more stealthy than you are if you have to move. And how much of the environment are you factoring into it? Are you distracting guards, or are you trying to sneak through something specific? do you leave a trace behind?
Right.
If, hey, you've rolled really bad, but there's no one here to see you, so maybe instead you accidentally drop something.
Mm-hmm.
I always assume as DM that players totally leave a trail unless they have something that says they don't, or
Right.
they've particularly made an effort. Like, I mean, if they're in a dungeon, there probably isn't a lot, but if they're like wandering through the woods, I don't assume they're leaving like
footsteps. Yeah.
Yes, they're not like, we are the night, as they stealthily move through the bushes, you know, with their like 15 stealth check. Like, they
Yeah.
probably aren't going to be noticeable to most creatures who aren't looking for them, but they will leave a trail if anyone is trying to
Yeah.
follow them.
Well, also if you're sneaking through the woods, if you're trying to avoid creatures might not be looking for you. They might be
Right.
smelling for you.
Right, exactly. So your stealth, I think, is sort of a combination of you trying to sort of tamp down things that would attract attention in general.
Yeah, stealth seems to be just a general sight, sounds, but like you're just lowering the chance of someone to detect you using their senses.
But there's some things you probably can't control.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the other thing that Tony had on here was unseen attackers and targets. This is something that doesn't, in my game, come up a lot on the player side, where you're trying to actually just, you know, like you were mentioning, would like be in hiding and, you know, essentially be like snipers.
Yeah.
And basically, when you can't see the target, you just have disadvantage on the attack roll.
It made a specific point when describing unseen attackers and targets that if you are hidden, meaning both unseen and unheard when you make an attack, no matter what, whether you hit or miss, your attack gives away your location.
Yep.
Well, and that's why rogues like have that ability to hide as a bonus action, so they can return to hiding, because you don't just remain in hiding. And I think that totally lines up with what you were saying, Will, about you know, hiding is, it's like a state, right? It's a thing that you're doing, not an act in the same sense. You have to return to that hidden state, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Another thing that, and this was just like a feat that helps with this, when the attack reveals your position, there's also the Skulker feat that basically kind of negates this. So if you miss, it actually says your position is not revealed if you miss with a ranged weapon attack while hidden.
So it gives you a little more freedom to try again if you screwed up.
It's like, oh, I missed.
Yeah.
Okay, but they don't know where I am.
Nice.
And also, you don't have disadvantage on your perception checks because of dim light.
Yeah, your perception checks don't take disadvantage when relying on sight.
I was just looking to see, because I was like, how far can the human eye actually see?
It's actually pretty far.
Yeah, I was like, I know it's in miles, but I didn't know how
I
many.
think it's like
Then it's-
2 miles or something.
But then it's like, well, what can you make out? I
Yeah,
feel
well-
like the 60 feet is like, okay, you can actually distinguish details.
Yeah, no, I would agree. Like 60 feet, or I think I wind up ruling like 120 feet just because of superior dark vision, since Drow are able to make out things in complete darkness at 120 feet.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, well, I'll put it at about like 100 to 120 feet of like normal open plains area. You guys can make out a decent degree of detail.
Oh, something we haven't talked about that's sort of vision related. Awareness of the space around you in combat, because we've had some players who come from other systems who are always worried about, well, can I make sure I'm facing this way, and are worried about facing.
Yes. Because that was a thing in 3.5, sort of, I think.
I can't remember if it was in 3.5, but
It's
I
an
think
optional,
it kind of was. Yeah.
It is an optional thing in 5e,
yeah.
where you're facing can change your AC even.
But it just adds more math.
It does.
I don't know.
But it adds a degree of believability too, because I mean, if someone comes up behind you and goes to stab you, you're not really going to be able to get your shield over there in time.
Yeah, you are.
Right.
You're constantly
Over.
whirling like a dervish.
But not if you're you're the Tasmanian devil.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yep.
But sorry, you're gonna say, Will?
Oh no, you kind of cover that, because like even if you're just factoring in dexterity with your AC, if someone comes right behind you, if you can't see it or if you can't react to it quick enough, it's going to be harder for you to react at someone behind you.
Yep.
Yeah, I guess I'd say my main problem with facing is just, as a DM, I'm like, it's just adding complexity without adding fun. But
Yeah.
that's just a personal bias piece rather than an actually thought out argument. I just don't like it, which is a terrible way to say it. So, have we summarized?
the wrap-up,
Yeah, I think we kind of talked through everything.
I think so.
Yeah.
We talked through literally everything.
Yeah.
I guess what we've determined is what we've been finding with all the rules, which is they're kind of open-ended. You need
Yep.
to decide how to apply them. We just feel strongly that they work well a certain way for us.
They work really well as guidelines, not as rules.
Yeah,
But-
I think that's a good way of phrasing it.
Oh, Tony's making disagreement faces. What is it, Tony?
No, I feel like there's a lot of aspects of these that actually work really well as rules, but I think particularly sneaking and hiding is very much more guideline.
Suggestions.
It's just because it's so vaguely worded. It's still very open ended, so it winds up like you have to decide ahead of time, like what does that mean to you as a DM and to you as the players, and kind of have like an understanding from players and DM, like what does it mean to be hiding?
Right.
Yeah.
But even going back,
That's true.
like to as it's written in the book, surprise
Yep.
as written in it, the GM determines who might be surprised. So
Yes.
Yes.
it literally puts it right into their hands and says, like, here, you get to make the decision, and this is the guideline of how it works. This is the suggestion of how it should be run, but you get to make the final call.
Hmm.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Which, in a sense, that's true for everything.
It's true for everything, but this one really puts it in your hands. Like,
Yeah, I feel like they're like, yeah, just take it away.
here's your GM card. Have fun.
Yeah, GM, you go have fun with this. Enjoy.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And before we end today's episode, we're going to have a brief interview with Will. Go ahead, Rachel.
How did you get into tabletop roleplay games, though? Did that come before or after?
It really started when I was in college. It was something I'd always wanted to do, but I never really had tons of opportunity to get into it. The most I'd done was play like card games like Yu-Gi-Oh, which started many middle school fights.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like,
And high school fights.
oh my god, we talked about that so much. Like, it was because Yu-Gi-Oh is just the right balance between well designed and terribly designed.
Mhm.
Yep.
Where it's like, hey, no, the core rules make a ton of sense, but everything after that is super complicated and they explain nothing. So
Mhm.
there was a ton of middle school fights of like, no, I won. No, you didn't. I won.
Yep.
and we'd both be right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
You could
in
say that.
college, I started playing D&D, and then I started playing more of it, and then I started DMing and playing as well. And now I have, 3 different campaigns, 4 if we extend over the course of a month, because I also volunteer with a local Philly-based group, Drinks and Dragons, that essentially just takes over a bar, fills it with nerds, and we all play D&D.
That's awesome.
Although I run the Star Wars RPG at those.
Okay.
Mm.
Yeah.
Which one?
The Fantasy Flight ones, Edge of the Empire, Force and Destiny, Age of Rebellion, they're all the exact same system, so they're more like source books than they are core rule. They're each the same core rule book across 3 different source books. It's a weird way of releasing.
Yep. So how did you go from just tabletop gaming and Magic the Gathering and Yu-Gi-Oh fights to podcasting then?
Well, I'm a massive narcissist.
Aw.
At least he's honest, guys.
And yeah, I like creating. I've got a big theater background. I mentioned to you guys that I do voice acting. So it was kind of a natural progression of, well, I have a shitload of downtime and I like sharing stuff I create. Let's make a podcast.
Awesome.
Yeah. It makes more sense than how we ended up in podcasting, because we don't have any talent or skill.
No, we don't. We're like, we
Well,
like games.
Both of those can be learned. That's the thing.
Yes,
that no one wants to tell anybody. Oh, you can practice?
Yeah.
That's what we
That's a
tell
thing?
ourselves. Yeah, that's what we say. We will get better over time, because
We have.
we have. Oh, for sure. I'm not.
Very minor better, but we have gotten better.
We're calling it incremental improvement.
There
And I
we
think
go.
that's the way to look at it.
Constructive criticism is appreciated.
Always.
Awesome. So of all the games you've played, of all the tabletop games, because it does sound like you've played several others besides just D&D, what would you say would be your favorite roleplay system to play?
D&D is a solid choice always, but I'm honestly starting to have more fun with the Star Wars RPGs, because they're a lot more narratively focused. Like, they were developed with the concept of let's make a movie, and it's just this. It works really well with how I tend to produce or how I tend to play, which is very Calvin Ball. I like the idea of basically going, who cares? That's a cool idea, and I forgot what the rule I agreed on was, so let's just do it.
This is totally gonna go great with our philosophy, which is
Right.
we're like, rules are made for a reason. Let's beat them with a stick until they're
let's
dead.
beat them with a stick.
No. It's let's figure out how we can manipulate this rule so it sounds the best when I say it.
Yes.
But one thing I really like about the Fantasy Flight system is that it encourages improvisation. That it has three different levels of success. You can succeed, you can have advantage, you can have an advantage or a disadvantage, and you can have a triumph or a despair. So you can succeed in something and still have something bad happen as a result of it, and then the game is figuring out what that bad thing is that's unrelated to your actual success. So, like the example that I use a lot when I'm trying to explain it is you succeeded with a disadvantage, so you managed to pick the lock, but in doing so you set off the alarm. And then it's kind of so it's a lot harder to plan out than a D&D campaign, but it takes a lot more involvement from everybody.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's pretty sure we've had stuff like that happen. Like, yes, the grenade goes off, but it also kills you.
The yes but
Yeah,
Right.
the yes, but
it's like, what's the but?
yeah,
It's gonna be good.
it's never good. So of all the games and everything you've played, I know this is probably the hardest question we have,
Mhm.
which sets the bar really, really high.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite moment from when you were you're most proud of as a DM or as a player?
I have two moments that really I keep with me. One was one of my first sessions as a player. I burned a forest down. Or,
Okay.
I almost did. A firebolt spell went wide. So we left the forest. The fire was eventually mostly put out. We left the forest. The fire was eventually mostly put out. We left the forest. An NPC ran up and yelled, "Oh my God, did you just come from the cursed forest?" And I very quickly replied to my DM, "Well, it is slightly less cursed now." Because there is slightly less forest. And that was one of those beautiful, like, a quick one-liner. My proudest moments as a DM, I had brought my players in to this concept I had that was vaguely inspired by the movie Labyrinth. And then I just went wild with it, where they were trapped in the astral plane by some weird outer god that was playing games with them, that was toying with them. And it said, okay, if you can survive these challenges, you can leave. And the first challenge was that they had to exist in the final memories of some people that the outer god had captured. From, I know I shared with you guys my campaign setting.
Mm-hmm.
But for your listeners, one of the ideas of the campaign setting is that there was a ancient society that was significantly more advanced than the one that exists now. And I compare it to, like, the modern society in the campaign setting is like Age of Exploration, and the ancient society is like Mass Effect. So they had to live through the final memories of these people in the Mass Effect era before the world was destroyed and chaos reigned for a few centuries. So what I essentially did was, okay, you wake up, and it was on Roll20, so I deactivated all of their character sheets, reactivated a new set of character sheets, and said, these are your characters now.
Oh, nice.
Wow.
And I essentially I had spent like a few days beforehand creating 4 level 15 characters of their existing classes. So I'm like, okay, you play a ranger, you're going to play a much higher level ranger. You play a rogue, you're going to play a much higher level rogue. You get a spaceship, a lightsaber, You have two of you have augmented prosthetics. Have fun.
Knock yourselves out.
So no one was disappointed, is what you're saying.
No. All of them went to me afterwards and was like, "This was the best session. This is the best session we've ever played." And I was like, "Okay, that's good because I did the best session you ever had, and that's bad because we're gonna keep playing after this."
Like, well, guys,
how am I gonna top this?
Let's quit. I think we're done. We've peaked.
Order's been set.
Yeah, that's the hard thing about DMing. It's kind of like being on a television show with lots of seasons. If you're doing a long running campaign, where you're like, "Oh man," but I can't just keep upping the ante over and over again because then it's easy.
It's like being on a TV show with a lot of seasons, but it's like if the writers all quit. So it's just you and the actors. So it's like if Whose Line Is It Anyway suddenly had to have a plot.
Right.
Yeah. Suddenly had to have a plot.
And you couldn't rely on any of your actors to do anything that you had planned, and they could all just go rogue at any moment.
Yeah.
But that's half the fun.
Welcome to D&D, where the game's made up and the points don't matter.
That is actually fairly accurate, though.
Yep.
It really is.
Yep.
You can't play it like other games.
No, there is no winning, except there is, but not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Will, for joining us and discussing with us the surprises and comparing it definitely to like other systems that, we don't all have the experience of playing with.
No problem. It's great talking with you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks so much for joining us.
Of course. So once again, I'm Will. I produce the podcast Plane Shift. You can find us on Twitter at PlaneShiftCast, or you can send us an email, planeshiftpodcast@gmail.com. My personal Twitter is Lemiel14and3, Lemiel.